11 Days of Remembrance, Day 5. Chapter 6. To the Guns. Temperatures in Mont Joigny, Quebec randomly register at minus 35 degrees Celsius below zero. It was a dry, vicious cold that crept its way in no matter how many layers of clothing you wore. At once it settled in your bones. It seemed reluctant to leave. It was a cold that always made it restlessly known. Upon his arrival at the base, it was evident to Larry that his location was not in any way prepared to train air gunners. That was Larry's first push with his hurry up and wait mentality of the armed forces. Instead of training for what they signed up to do, would post themselves at different stations to guard either the bomb drop, the electrical station, or the casino aircraft that were used in the Atlantic to patrol for submarines. Harry was assigned to guard the bomb drop at exposed area on the base, where the wind seemed to be blowing a few knots faster than everywhere else. There was a little shelter in the Larry exploded truck that delivered him. He was immediately exposed to the elements. Digging a hole in a perilously high snowbank, Larry sung good propelled as kept from freezing to death. Among 2 hours later, a truck drove up to dump Larry, already frozen in place. Stayed silent. He didn't recognize the truck, but he was reluctant to fire off his fully loaded rifle on someone that could be innocent. For several moments the truck simply sat there. No one left the vehicle, no one entered, wondering whether he should ask questions and then shoot, or shoot and say to hell with the questions. Larry was beginning to think he had to make a move. He was positive that whoever it was could hear his heart pounding. He was talking himself into doing something when the truck started and drove in the same direction he came. From midnight of the same night, the exact same truck drove up to the bomb dump. This time, Larry rose and executed his snow encouraged rehearsal, determined to figure out what was going on. The driver's side door opened, and the same sergeant who had assigned Larry to do this particular guard duty stepped out. Standing in the frigid outdoors, both men breathed formed clouds of steam around their faces. There was an agonizing moment of silence before the sergeant began to unload on Larry. The angered sergeant came so close to Larry's face that he could feel heat from the man's breath. If he wasn't so scared, he probably would have welcomed the tiny bit of warmth it provided. The sergeant had been testing Larry's nerves earlier in the evening by pulling up an unknown truck. The fact that Larry had failed to take action bothered him more than a little bit. He yelled at Larry for what seemed to be an eternity. He went up one side of him and down the other, accusing Larry of desertion of duty, abandoning during the guard post, disobeying orders, and anything else he could spew into the 30 below air. Every time Larry tried to interject and give his side of the story, the sergeant held up his hand in a discouraging gesture. When it seemed that sergeant had finally tired himself out, he instructed Larry to get in the truck. They drove back to the barracks, which was a silent one. There were only words either man spoke were said just as Larry was exiting the vehicle, bound for his bed. A sergeant took the opportunity to inform Larry that he was to report to a disciplinary hearing at 0700 hours the next morning. It was to be conducted by Commanding Officer Group Captain Frost. When Larry finally climbed in his bunk that night, his buddy Roy Strickland was still awake and reading by the light of a small lamp. Placing the book in his lap, he looked at Larry and said, "You look like you had one hell of a rough night." Staring as his freezing limbs started into the warmth of the lately comfortable barracks, Larry gave Roy a full account of what had taken place that night. When he was finished, Roy said, "Well, you better get your head down and get some rest. Looks like you have a tough day ahead of you." "I'm so damn stressed, Roy. I doubt I'll sleep a wink." Turning on his side, Roy looked Larry in the eyes and explained, "You just don't understand what the elements of stress is, Larry. Once you know, you have been able to sleep just fine. You see, stress is nothing more than confusion created when mind overrides the body basic desire to choke the living shit out of some asshole that really deserves it." Larry looked at Roy. The man seemed genuinely sure that his revelation was to help Larry get through the night. "Gee, thanks, Dr. Strickland. That helped me a lot." Roy winked at him, turned off his light, and moments later the sound of snoring filled the tiny barracks. Larry lay down on the bed and looked up at the ceiling. Sleep was definitely not his agenda that night. He should be up tossing and turning until 0700 hours, which fate would be decided. At some point during the end of the night, Larry must have dozed off. The sound of the recovery woke him at 0600 sharp. Larry, dressed in his uniform, paying particular attention to the shine of his boots and the knot in his tie. He wanted to look the best. He figured that at the very least he would try to make a good impression. Skipping breakfast, he went directly down to the makeshift courtroom located at the abandoned building on the base. He was early, so to pass the time he sat in a chair outside the doors that led to the courtroom. As he figured in the hardwood chair, he focused on not throwing up. His inside kept time to the rhythm of his pounding heart. At 0700 hours on the dot, Captain Frost and the sergeant from the night before arrived in dress uniform. The commanding officer looked at Larry and smiled. "Morning, Sutherland." Larry attempted to reply, but all came out of his mouth was a short squawk. The sergeant sneered at Larry behind the captain's back. "Not need to be nervous, son. Let's get this over with, shall we?" Frost said as he opened the door to the courtroom. The commanding officer took his place behind a large wooden desk. He motioned for Larry to sit in a chair placed in front of it as Frost put on his glasses to read the stack of papers the sergeant had placed in front of him. Larry could not help but notice that Frost looked more bored than anything. He took that as a good sign, and a silver of hope began to creep back in his spirit. The sergeant read the charge. When he was finished, he began to launch into his own version of what had passed the night before. The captain heard him out and then turned to Larry. "Why don't you tell me your version of what happened, seeing how In fear dismayed the sergeant, Larry began speaking with renewed confidence. If I had stayed in the guard closure, I would have frozen to death. I chose to move a degree or two out of the wind and dug myself into snowbank. I saw the truck pull up the first time and had my rifle ready. Ray explained that he had the advantage of Coleman and had real doubts about he should do if anyone got out of the truck. The whole explanation took about 5 minutes. Throughout the entire thing, Captain Frost kept his eyes on the paper in front of him. Aren't you in charge of building the hockey rink for the base? Larry was indeed in charge of the rink project, but a abrupt change in line of questioning took him completely off guard. Larry stammered, "Yes, sir, I am. How that going?" "Just fine, sir. It should be ready any day now." Fixing the instrument, calling Officer Floss said, "Well, Sergeant, that just about covers that." Turning to Larry, he smiled and said, "You're free to go, Solomon. Let me know how that rink is processing. I got a new pair of skates I want to try out." With that, he got up the room, humming under his breath, standing and holding their hands in salute until he left the room. The sergeant and Larry faced each other as the door closed behind the captain. The sergeant turned and left the room without another word, but if looks could have killed this story, but at end because Larry could have dropped dead then and there. The sergeant later went on to become air gunner the following night. Larry was assigned to guard a fairly battle that had crash landed in a field. The pilot had missed the runway and was forced to execute an emergency landing. As a general rule, and time of aircraft lands on surface other than the one it's already supposed to, if it wins and what remains of the aircraft is scrapped off in pieces. The time, however, the pilot managed to put the ferry down in a farmer's field covered in a generous amount of snow. As a result, the unbearably of the plane and wings relatively remained undamaged. Larry sat in the cold cockpit for 2 nights before a salvage team was dispatched from Eastern Air Command Central Salvage near Moncton, New Brunswick. He didn't complain though. A cold cockpit was hell a lot better than the mix of igloo he had been hiding out in at the bomb dump. When the salvage crew finally arrived a couple days later, they were pleasantly surprised at the condition of the aircraft. They had been explained to find a tangled heap of metal that more symbol of the snow. Eventually, resumed their effort. The problem was the gas tank, located in the wings of the aircraft, were almost completely full. Zal's crew had made no precision to recover fuel by regulation. It could now not be used in another aircraft. They decided the farmer who owned the land. As it turned out, the farmer also owned several 45-gallon drums. The crew managed to siphon off all the fuel in the wings and offered it to the farmer free of charge. Now, aviation fuel doesn't work like regular gas petrol. It has a much higher octane content that therefore burns at a much higher temperature. This makes it quite the enemy of regular automotive engines, but during the war, petrol was strictly rationed, and the farmer was grateful to receive the aviation fuel. As a result, persons finding themselves in a position to obtain some of the fuel generally cut it with fuel oil or kerosene in order to run it in their vehicles, and the particular instruction the local parish priest got wind of what transpired and decided he was against it. In his holy manner, he demanded that it was not appropriate for the farmer to be using the aviation fuel. Perhaps he thought that it was written somewhere that those Salt had used fuel for crippled aircraft for the purpose of operating other vehicles. Sadly, the fuel from the aircraft wings was emptied onto the farmer's field. It was an unbearable waste, but the Salvage crew had a job to do transporting the aircraft, and the amount of fuel in it was a risk was willing to take. On January 10th, 1943, Larry began his training as an air gunner. The very first plane Larry flew in a ferry battle. It was armed with a single Vickers machine gun. The ferry battle was a single-engine light bomber built by Ferry Aviation in the late 1930s. For the Royal Air Force, it was powered by the same Rolls-Royce Marlin piston engine that the Supermarine Spitfire. Its high performance, however, the battle was weighing down at a three-man crew and a bomb load. It was slow, limited range, and highly vulnerable to attack. During the Battle for France in 1940, the ferry battle recorded the first RAF victory of the Second World War. Despite the claim, it was terrible, causing and it was pulled from the front lines. There was always two gunners in the aircraft along the pilot. The gunners sat in open cockpit directly behind the pilot. As for to mock them, the designs of the aircraft placed a small plastic windshield in front of the gunners. Its purpose was partly to block the gunner from the blast of cold air that swept across the aircraft during flight. Which it did really well was collect bugs, and that's about it. In the firing position, the gunner stood upright with his body in the slipstream to prevent being bounced out of the open cockpit. He hooked his harnesses to a wire safety line attached to the very careful to keep away from the edge of a large opening. The fuselage target practice boys paddle the Vickers on a plane. The Vickers machine gun was a leftover from the First World War, but it was very dependable. One of the earliest first excavators had to perform an air gunner was to disassemble and reassemble the guns while wearing a blindfold. In the later years, Larry would look back at the exercise and wonder what were the powers that would be thinking, even if they could reassemble a gun that dark, if it was doing it flying over Berlin at 18,000 feet, where the temperatures were 60 below, their hands would freeze. The gun would, when the air gunner finished firing a round, he had to walk to the aircraft to open bay doors and tap the pilot on the shoulder to let him know that he had completed one run. It was during one of these training flights that Larry won the prize for highest shooting score. A handsome sum of $32 sitting behind him was his friend Ken Sundell. Ken was a great guy, but in Larry's opinion, he was not cut out to be a gunner. Ken suffered from air sickness, and this flight was no exception. The condition was made worse by the fact that Ken was seated at the enclosure waiting for his turn to shoot, inhaling vast amount of exhaust fumes. Was the time come for the hands to switching position for Ken to shoot. Ken confessed that he was incapable of operating the gun, telling the pilot that he wanted another shooting run. Larry preferred to do the drill a second time. Ken passed him another planner amount for the Vickers, which Larry fired at the target. Uploading Larry stepped out of the aircraft was greeted by a round applause. His fellow peers. The instructor slapped him on the back and told him no one had ever come close to his last round. The close had been that of the crewmate Ken, though on the ground was unaware that Ken had not taken a single shot. Larry had shot the best round, and then, not to be outdone by himself, shot another damn near perfect. At the end of the month's whirring of training, throughout the training, Larry Goss was ready to graduate. They threw a big party where everyone celebrated. Third, where Captain Frost played the piano and drank beer with the men. The following day, when he planned to go overstrip and event, the Frost was in a melancholy mood and had nothing to do with the precious evenings. Acceleration uh, held the person called to the salute the county officer. Frost looked upon the group of young men as if he had not expected many of them to come home. Unfortunately, his fears would be confirmed. That's the end of chapter 6. I'll read chapter 7 tomorrow. Um, if you see a veteran, say thank you to them, and they look like they're sad, just become a friend, be a friend, and just be nice to them and say thank you. I think of the people who fought World War One, World War Two, so I could be free, so I could read this book and I could do my YouTube videos and my blogs. Thank you.